Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. This is our Wednesday night Bible study. I am Pastor Dave, Senior Shepherd at Living Manna Church. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I hope that you are ready for a good Bible study, a great Bible study. I actually got some great stuff to talk about today that I think will be very encouraging, but also very informative to all of us. We are or have been for some time in the book of Romans. We are continuing in that book. But before I jump into all of that, excuse me, let me just say a quick couple of things, some commercials out of the way. Number one, if you are not subscribed, please, if you're on YouTube, subscribe, hit that button. If it's red, that means you're not subscribed. Hit that button. Be subscribed, hit the bell. This way you are notified every time that we go live. You can give us a thumbs up. You can give us a comment, shout out, let us know where you're watching from. If you're in the chat room tonight, just comment, question, get involved with each other, have a conversation on the side of all of this. And also, if you're on Facebook, certainly give us a thumbs up and share this. This is going to be a study that you are going to want to share with other people. I can tell you that right now before we even jump into this. This is definitely going to be a study, one of those studies that you're going to want to share with people that are really interested in the truth. One other side note, as far as a commercial goes, this upcoming weekend, of course, is the beginning for us of Yom Kippur. That's Friday night. We're going to be, that'll be the Yom Kippur Eve, and Saturday obviously is the Sabbath and also the High Sabbath. And it breaks my heart to even have to ask this of our congregation that's here within the Bronx area, our physical congregation here. But you know what's been going on with the flooding and all the stuff. We got to move out of the church and all of that kind of, those things that are going on. We got so much stuff to get rid of. We've ordered a dumpster. And we are making a call out. If a lot of people said they want to help, if you really want to help. And again, it breaks my heart to ask this, but quite literally, our donkey is in a hole this weekend. And so I'm asking if you can to please help us out this upcoming Saturday. I know it's the Sabbath, but this upcoming Saturday, if you can give us a couple of hours, we're going to start at 11 o'clock in the morning. This way, it's right after our morning manna. Sleep in a little bit late, watch the morning manna, come on down. We need as many hands as we can get to not just clean out the church, but to dispose of all of the garbage and all those things, everything that was just, ruined by the flood. We could really use your help. So I'm asking, certainly as Yeshua said, sometimes the donkey falls in the hole on the Sabbath and you got to deal with it. So I'm asking for your help. I know it's a holy day, but it's a high holy day. But in order to have a service, we really need to get this place back into shape. So thank you in advance for everybody. I'll put it out also on the notifications for those that may not be watching tonight. And again, just thank you in advance for all of that. So enough of the commercials. Let's jump right into this. Tonight's study is study number 22. Now we're almost done with the book of Romans, but we're gonna backtrack just a little bit tonight because we went over chapter 13 last week and we were jumping right into chapter 14. We're supposed to do chapter 14 this week, but I want to make sure that we really have an understanding of what chapter 13 is actually about, because it is very important. And besides that, it is absolutely not even probably, it is absolutely one of the most misunderstood, misinterpreted chapters. I see it on Bible studies. I see it watching other preachers. I've seen it over the years. So many do not understand what this chapter is actually about. And we make some pretty big mistakes because of this chapter. So I wanted us to back up just a little bit before we jump into chapter 14. I want to make sure that we have a strong handle on chapter 13. Now, last week we talked about, I believe the title was Living Peaceably. And it was out of chapter 13, which says, as much as is possible, live peaceably with all men. Well, we're going to kind of still be in chapter 13, except for today, it's number 22, and the title is Governing Authorities. Governing authorities. Very important. Let's read the first verse. Chapter 13 and verse 1 says, let every being be in subjection to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from Elohim. And the authorities that exist are appointed by Elohim. Let's say a quick prayer. Father, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that is willing to obey. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, so hey guys, welcome. For those that are joining us on the chat, thanks for coming in. For those on Facebook, thanks so much for tuning in tonight. We appreciate that. So here we are, chapter 13. As I said, we talked about this just a little bit before, and let's jump into this. Let me put this up a little bit bigger so everybody can see it. I want us to take a little bit closer look at chapter 13, because again, as I said before, this is a very, very misunderstood chapter. And part of the misunderstanding that I think over time has taken over this chapter has to do primarily with Rome, with the Gentile nations coming in and sort of redefining the scripture in their terms. There are two basic interpretations that I'm going to share with you tonight of what chapter 13 is all about. There is, number one, the interpretation that is from a Gentile church perspective. I'm talking about today. I'm talking about who we are. And not just today. I'm talking like the last, 1700 years, from Rome all the way on. Protestant, evangelical, Catholic, you name it, it's across the board. Check the commentaries. They are all the same. They all say the same thing about this chapter, that this is a chapter about submitting to government authority. Submitting to whoever the authority was in that government, your government at the time. Now, don't forget, when Saul is writing this, Rome is in charge. Guys, think about that for a second. Rome is in charge, and so the interpretation that has come across history is really kind of self-serving to the Gentile church way of thinking. Because don't forget, Rome was not just a Gentile church. They were the authority. At least that's what they claimed to be, the authority in all things, both government and also, quote unquote, religious. So the first interpretation, the first concept or thought that I want to throw out there, because this is the most widely accepted thought or interpretation that there is. Check any commentary. You will see a version of this. And the version of the interpretation, remember, this is from a Gentile church perspective, different from what you and I understand today, what you and I are now walking in, probably what most of us used to walk in, but things have changed for us. But from a Gentile church perspective, this is about government. This is about kings and queens and prime ministers and presidents and legislatures and congressmen and senators and all of that kind of stuff. It's about taxes, the money that you pay to the government for whatever services it is that they render. It is ultimately, or at least from a Gentile church perspective, it is ultimately about the state. And with that mindset, as you begin to read chapter 13, it is read from that perspective that all of this is about how we as believers are supposed to be in relationship to the state. We'll get to that in a second. The second interpretation that is not widely held, but that I'm putting forward to you, I believe is the absolute truth, is that this, and it comes in a twofold kind of concept here. The second interpretation is that, number one, or A, this can only be interpreted in the context of chapters, and I put chapters 11 and 12, but it's actually chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12. You can't separate chapter 13 from everything that Saul said before this. because he didn't write in chapters, he wrote in concepts, and he is building step on step on step on step to a particular understanding. And this is really, chapter 11 was the climax of that understanding. And this is sort of that secondary, wrap it all up, put it all in a bow, and this is what we got to do sort of thing. So first of all, we need to view this in the context, again, from chapters 9 through 12. But secondly, we must interpret this from a Hebraic perspective, not from a Gentile church perspective, because the two are not the same. They are very, very different. And you guys know this already. You're walking in Yah. You've already begun to understand that a lot of what we may have understood before, now that we really have eyes to see and ears to hear, that's a real important prayer, especially for tonight. We're starting to see that, wait a minute, we were told this, but this is what the book actually says. So that's going to kind of be the idea. So we need to understand our Hebrew roots. That to coin a phrase, or really not to coin a phrase, it's out there already. We need to understand our Hebrew roots, and we do not. Today, in the modern world of religion, we have no concept, no idea whatsoever of our Hebrew roots, and yet we try to interpret this chapter without that perspective, and that is just downright impossible to do. And listen, we all did it. I did it. We all did it. We didn't know. We didn't see, but now we see. And so here we go. The Gentile church perspective. Let me explain this first before we jump into, because the rest of the study is going to be about the Hebraic perspective. But let's take a look at the Gentile church perspective. Okay, if chapter 13, and you know what, maybe it would be good. We already looked at verse 1. It says, "Let every being be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from Elohim." Now, again, the idea is that he's talking about he's talking about the government. He's talking about Rome. He's talking about Caesar. He's talking about the senators and stuff, mayors, governors, etc., etc. The idea of the church perspective is that this is a political, or he's speaking about political or governmental leaders. Again, i.e., Rome. Now, I get why this perspective became so prominent, because the people who were translating the scripture from 300, 325 on, and were separated from their Hebrew roots, kind of, maneuvered things to seem to be that's what it says. They had no Hebraic thought or way of understanding, and so they wrote, or they interpreted from their own understanding. However, so here's I'm going to go through verses 1, and let me just grab another Bible. Let me just quick fasten. I didn't put this up there, but you guys can, if you got your Bibles, you guys can check this out yourselves. But I want to read from verses 1 through verse 6. I'm going to read it out of my Bible. I got the King James in front of me. Actually, it's the New King James. But I want to read verses 1 through 6 for you, and then we'll go back and we're going to look at what the Gentile perspective is on all of this of chapter 13. It says the following: "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from Elohim, God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists," let me just turn that up. There we go. "Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of Elohim. And those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister for you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore, you must be subject not only to because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Render, therefore, to all their due. Taxes upon whom taxes are due. Customs upon whom customs. Fear to whom fear. Honor to whom honor. Okay, so, you read those last couple of verses and it sure sounds kind of like, government stuff. Taxes, paying taxes, getting what you're due. But let's look at this from a church, a Gentile perspective. Verse 1 tells us to be subject to them. If the idea is that we're talking about a government, it's telling all of Yah's people to be subject to them. It's not giving a parameter, it's just saying be subject to them, because these authorities are from God. First problem with that is the government Shaul is writing under is Rome. And oppression was all over their people. And even if you don't think about, and we'll get into more what was going on in the day of Shaul, but jump back to the story of Daniel and the Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael. Did they obey all the ordinances of the government around them? Well, they did for a lot of things that did not conflict with their faith. They were all made eunuchs. They all had their manhood removed. And you don't hear a peep in the scripture about that. But when it came to the food, when it came to worshiping something that was not God, even when the death penalty was on the table, these men did not submit or subject themselves to ungodly authority. So that's just off the bat, just a thought to think about. We'll develop this some more later. But if we are to believe this, what Shaul or Saul is telling us is you need to be subject to all of them, because all of these authorities come from God. Now, true, no king gets set up without God say so, but who is the God of this world? Who is the one that gives the beast his power? Who is the one that's pulling the strings of the beast? Well, we know because the scripture tells us clearly it is the dragon himself. So this idea that all authorities come from God and that we are to be subject to them is at least from the first two verses, I would start to I have my back up a little bit and saying, wait a minute, I'm not really sure about this. It says, if you resist them, in verse 2, you resist God. Well, wait a minute. That's not what the Hebrew young men did. They resisted the government, the governing authority in the world at that day, because they honored God, and they were not resisting God. And then it tells us not only if you resist them, that you resist God, but that if you resist them, judgment will come upon you. Verse 3 told us that they, that is the governing authorities, Rome, Caesar, governors, etc., they support good works and not evil. Now, hold on just a second. Rome did not support good works. And quite honestly, Rome supported lots of evil. All from their entire history, evil was supported. So again, as we're starting to go through this with some fine, comb thinking here, this is not making sense. At least not to me. It's not making sense that he is talking about governing leaders, politicians, government. Verse 3, the B and C part of verse 3 says, do what they say, meaning the government, if this is from a Gentile church perspective, do what they say, meaning the government, and they will leave you alone. Oh boy, don't we hear, this is kind of timely, especially with everything that's going on all around us today, people being told to do something. And if you read this, you say, well, if you don't do it, you're somehow the government's going to come down on you. Fear them. They're telling you to do right. And if you don't, so all of a sudden you start thinking about this in the context, especially of what's going on all around us. This is really contradictory to really what the scripture says. But here, verses 3, B and C. So if you do what they say, they'll leave you alone. Verses 4 and 5, however, say, if you don't obey them, if you don't obey the government from the church perspective, they bear the sword. They will avenge and they will execute wrath. I mean, think about that for a second. Well, and is that, I mean, I'm not saying that governments don't do that. And guys, we're living through it right now. Governments do that. And then verse 6 goes on to say, for this benefit of doing what is good in the government sight, that they don't mess with you, this is why you pay taxes. That's what verse 6 tells us. This is why you pay taxes, at least the way we would read it in the English, or the way it would be interpreted from a Gentile perspective. Again, you start to go through this, and there's all sorts of biblical issues that are coming up. And I'm not saying that it is not in any way that we are supposed to be rebellious to whatever nation we live under, wherever we are in the world. Daniel was obedient in certain things, but he knew where to draw the line. The whole thing, a law is made. You can't pray. Daniel prays. What's the consequence? Being thrown to the lions. He did it anyway. He did not follow these instructions that Shaul is giving us, if in fact these instructions are about obeying governmental authority. So I'm not telling you to not obey government authority. There are some things we should obey. There are things that's a whole different conversation, but that is not the conversation that we are reading about here. This has nothing to do with kings, nothing to do with rulers, nothing to do with governments, nothing to do with paying taxes even. But we'll get to that in just a second. Let's take a look at next verse here. I want to show you something. The word for taxes and customs, because that's what you get in verse 17 of chapter verse 7 of chapter 13. It tells us to pay taxes to who taxes is due, and to pay custom to who customs are due. Well, the English word is translated there as taxes, but when you go to Mark chapter 12, verse 17, it's in a couple of other places too. You can look up where the other places are. When they come to Yeshua, they say, should we pay taxes to Caesar, right? Remember that part? Should we pay taxes to Caesar? And of course, Yeshua says, show me the coin. Whose image is on the coin, right? And of course, it's got Caesar's picture. So he says, fine, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, but give to Yah what is Yah's. And of course, what has Yah's image on it? Everything has Yah's image on it, or his handprint on it. The word for taxes there is translated as tax, but it's also, it really means tribute, but it's translated as tax. And it is in your Strong's, you can look this up, it's in your Strong's Concordance, number 2778. It is the word kensos, and it means tribute, or to pay a tax to a government. Romans 13:7, however, the translation of tax and then customs is Hebrew number 5411. And 5411 is the word phoros, P-H-O-R-O-S. Let me just find it on here real quick. Yeah, P-H-O-R-O-S. And here's, again, you guys can look this up for yourselves. It says, the definition is an individual assessment on person or property. A tax. Well, a tax can be or is an assessment on your person or your property, your house, your car, whatever it is, whatever you buy at the store, we have to pay a tax, an assessment on it. But this says it is an individual assessment on a person or property. In also chapter 13 and verse 7, the second time that word is used, and it's related to it, it's not translated as tax, it's translated as custom. The word custom is 5056 in your Strong's Concordance, and it is the word telos. And you'll see when you go look it up, it'll sort of point back and forth to 5411 and 5056. And here's the definition of 5056 telos, or custom: to set out for a definite point or goal. The point aimed at as the limit, conclusion of an act or state, the result, as impost or levy. Impose, something that would be imposed upon someone or levied upon someone, as paid, a continual custom. Finally, in other words, the end, the uttermost. And it is translated custom, and then of course it gives you the connection to phoros, this idea of a tax. Well, let me try to give you a better understanding of what this is actually saying. The phoros, the 5411, the first time in Romans 13:7, it says this is why you pay taxes. Give taxes to whom taxes are due. Give custom to who customs are due. Give an individual assessment on the person or property, in this case, a person. Guys, we do this all the time. If you ever go to a restaurant, we joke about this, me and PM, we joke about this, we got this meter on how we apply our tax, our individual assessment on your waiter or waitress. And the idea is you pay for your food. You already have tax in there. That's already, included with the, with the meal. They already got the tax down there. And then you pay something called a gratuity. We would say a tip. We've got this running joke, because if you get a really, really bad waiter, which happens, unfortunately it happens, Pastor Matt has this meter that it starts here, but the worse the waiter is, that meter goes down and down and down and down. And, we joke about it, but what he's doing is he is making an individual assessment on the person. Why should I give them 25, 30% tip if I didn't get any water, all the dishes were dirty, the food was cold, I couldn't get them when I needed them, we waited for an hour and a half before anybody came. You understand what I'm trying to say? That's making an assessment and then paying what is the value, which leads us to a custom. A custom, or telos, again, sent out for a definite goal or point. It is the proper and ultimate customary point of payment. So while you're making an assessment, a custom would be this is the ultimate. This is the entire value of what is due. So pay taxes, make an assessment, and custom, give that the what is final or uttermost in payment to that individual and or thing, a tax. But it's also, again, it's translated as not as tax, as tax, but it's translated also as tribute. So I want you to understand how these two words work together, because these are the two words that we see in chapter 13, verse 7. We do not see the word from chapter 12 that just means tax. And it's not to say that maybe these words can't be synonymous in some way, but when you understand from a Hebrew perspective, these definitions all of a sudden make much, much more sense down the road. So with that kind of being said, let us take a look at chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12, not from a Gentile, modern 21st century, evangelical, Catholic, Protestant perspective. Let's look at it from a Hebraic perspective, from the renewed covenant perspective. So let's look at context. We must understand context because they're all related. All of these chapters are an argument that is being built up step by step by step by step. So here's just a couple things. I know that we went over this before, so this is really just cursory, but here is chapter 9, 10, and 11. Let me give you an overall thing that you can look for, and I'll prove it to you as we go through the scripture. What is chapter 9? What is chapter 10? What is chapter 11 and chapter 12? What could we boil down all of those chapters to if we were going to kind of summarize them all together? Well, they are about two different groups of people. Two different groups of people that are not connected to each other, that ultimately are to be connected to each other. In Israel's rejection in chapter 9, Israel's rejection brought compassion, it tells us, on the Gentiles. Just like Pharaoh's rejection brought compassion on Israel, the whole analogy he's saying is that the compassion is now upon the Gentiles, while wrath is on the house of Israel. But he splits up in this concept of chapter 9 between the Gentiles, the nations, and the Jew, the nation of Israel, as one is going to receive wrath, one is going to receive mercy. This is one of the verses from chapter 9. It says, "And that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of compassion," verse 23, actually, from chapter 9. "That he might make known the riches of his esteem on the vessels of compassion, which he had prepared beforehand for glory, even whom he called." And look at how Shaul, how he frames the conversation, not only on us, the Jew, but also on the nations. Two different groups. He's now saying there are still those Jews who are getting God's compassion, though the house of Israel may be getting wrath. There are still those Jews upon whom there is compassion. And there is the nations, and he's separating them as Jews, not only of us, speaking of himself as well, the Jews, but also of the nations. Two different peoples is what he's talking about. In chapter 10, he continues this same theme in verses 10 through 13. He says there's no distinction. So now he's building. First he says there is a distinction. One's getting wrath, one's not. A group from the Jews aren't. They have compassion. And a group from the Gentiles, but they're still Gentiles and Jews. But by chapter 10, he tells us in verses 12 and 13, there's no distinction between those who are receiving the compassion, whether you are Jew or you are Gentile. Verse 12 says, because there is no distinction between. So this idea of Jew and Gentile, by chapter 10, he's starting to say, wait a minute, that's not really the way it is. Between Jew, Yehudi, and Greek. For the same master of all is rich to those who call upon him. For, and here it is, the verse everybody knows, for everyone who calls on the name of Yehovah shall be saved, which is kind of interesting because I really didn't cover this even when we talked about this. It doesn't say, and I'm not saying that we don't call on the name of Yeshua, but that's not the verse he quoted. He said, on those who call on the name of Yehovah will have salvation. They will be they will be delivered. A whole other topic, and we'll get into it just a little bit, which is the whole idea of Yehovah and who Yeshua is, as we've come to understand it, is the same individual. But put that aside just for a second. The idea here is that he has split up Jew, or now he's not splitting up, he's putting them together, split them up in chapter 9. Now he's putting them together in chapter 10. And then he goes on in chapter 11 and verse 11. Look at what it says. I say then, have they, and by the they, he's talking about the Jews, the Israel of his day, but Judah. I say, have they, Judah, stumbled that they should fall? In other words, fall forever, gone, done, finished. He says, no, let it not be. But by their, meaning Judah, their fall, deliverance has come to the nations. Again, two groups, Jew and nations. And the nations, he's telling us, are supposed to provoke those who have fallen of Judah to jealousy. This is a really important point because you can't provoke the Jew to jealousy by religious actions that have nothing to do with what they understood to be true from Moses to begin with. So, and that's why why the modern religious world does not provoke Judaism. In fact, it does provoke Judaism, but not to jealousy. To anger is more like it for the history that has gone on. But the only way you could provoke a fallen Judah back to their God is if they see you worshiping their God the way he is supposed to be worshiped, as has been given to us in the scripture from Genesis to Malachi. Verse 24, same chapter, chapter 11, says, "For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature," we went over what all that means. You can check out the studies that came before this, "and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree." So if you were, well, I guess it bears explaining. If you're cut out of a wild olive tree, what does it mean to be a wild olive tree, and what does it mean to be a cultivated olive tree? A wild olive tree has no concept of Moses to Malachi, has no concept of the law and the prophets. It's foreign. They do not have that root. And now that wild olive tree is being grafted into the cultivated one. What is a cultivated one? One that does have knowledge from Genesis to Malachi and everything in between. How much more shall these who are the natural branches, even the Jew that has been broken off, be grafted into their, and here it is, it's not only is it in red, remember red is what the scripture says, yellow is sort of my commentary, be grafted into their own tree. We are grafted into their tree, not into another tree. And so it's time. So for them to be grafted, or for them to be brought to jealousy, to want to be grafted back into what they already find familiar, what they will already understand and know, everything from Moses all the way to Malachi. That is what they would be grafted back into, including Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and everything else, and understanding it all in that perspective. Two groups. Verses 25 and 26 go on to say, "For I do not want you or wish you to be ignorant of this secret, brothers, lest you should be wise in your own estimation, that hardening in part has come over Israel, the Jew, until the completeness of the nations, the Gentile, has come in." And so when you get Jew and Gentile together, and so all Israel, one nation, one people, shall be saved, as it has been written. And he goes on to quote some other scriptures. But let's follow the context here. We started off with two opposed groups. Chapter 10, they're supposed to be united. Here we are united, and until we are all fully united, that will be the end. That's sort of the culmination of everything. So there's a progression of thought that of the two, they are made to be one. That's the whole idea of what all of these chapters have 9, 10, and 11 so far have been about. But not just 11. Let's take a look at chapter 12. Chapter 12 and verse 5, we went over this, and it says, "So we, the many," now by we, don't forget he's talking to both Jew and Gentile. So when he says we, he's now talking about us. The Gentile has been grafted into us, into the cultivated vine. "So we, the many, are one body in Messiah." So those people who had no concept, no idea, no wild olive trees, are now grafted into this cultivated olive tree. And what he's saying is they are no longer two. They started off as two in chapter 9, but here by chapter 12, he's saying, no more. Now in Messiah, they are one, and members of each one of, members each one of another. This idea of unity, or echad, if you would. Verse 10 goes on to say in chapter 12, in brotherly love, tenderly loving towards one another. Towards who? The Jews whose branches have not been broken off and do believe in Yeshua, and the Gentiles who are now no longer Gentiles, but have been grafted into the cultivated olive tree. He's telling them you need to have loving brotherly love, tender loving towards one another. The two groups, he's telling us, need to become one. In appreciation, giving preference to each other. Verse 16 goes on to say, be of the same mind toward one another. Guys, you have no idea what a tall order that is. That what Shaul is telling them, first of all, everything he tells them in chapter 12 comes right out of the Torah from chapters 17 all the way to 21 out of Leviticus. But he's telling them, you guys who think so differently, who are uncultivated, now you need to have the same mind toward one another. Do not be proud in mind, but go along with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. So everything from chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, chapter 12, as he's talking to the two groups, and how over the chapters they are connected to each other as one. And so now in chapter 12, he's given them Torah. He's given just some practical Torah scriptures saying this is what they were always about. This is what it means to be one. You're in the family of God. This is how you need to live with each other. When someone in the family of God is an enemy, does something dumb, something stupid to you, these are the instructions on how to deal with these. Not talking about enemies that, you're fighting in war and, people that want to kill you. That's not the enemy he's talking about. He's talking about your brother. He's talking about the community of faith. And guys, you have been around people of the community of faith to know that we get on each other's nerves quite often. And so he's giving us, and that's us who are so far removed from this. Here's people who despised each other in the beginning, wanted nothing to do with each other. And so now they are being joined into this body, being made one. And that process is not without incident. It is not without much effort. So here is the same concept is given to us in the book of Ephesians, because Shaul talks about this in multiple places. But here is the same concept. Now here's what I want you to realize, and I just briefly mentioned it: the animosity between Jew, whether you were Nazarene or you were a Pharisee or a Sadducee, doesn't matter. If you were Jew, you despised the Gentiles. And if you were Gentile, you didn't care about the Jews. You didn't like them. You didn't really care what they did. Let them go do their own thing. I want nothing to do with them. And the two groups had this equal animosity towards each other. So these two groups that are almost diametrically or spiritually or morally, ethically, in every way possible, opposed to one another, one group, that is the wild olive tree, now has to learn to live in the other group and with the other group. And the other group has to now learn how to live with what was really, I guess, their true enemy, if you would, that who opposed them. Shaul talks about this in Ephesians chapter 2 and verses 11 through 12. Listen to this. It says, therefore, remember that you, the Gentiles he's talking to, once of the nations, once a Gentile, because if you're grafted into a cultivated olive tree, you're no longer a wild olive branch, or you have to now learn how to not be a wild olive branch and learn to be cultivated, learn to understand the instructions. So therefore, remember that you, once nations in the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision. Guys, that's a racial slur. You can use think of any racial, slur we've heard throughout all of our lives of whatever group, whatever culture, whatever color, whatever language. That's what this is. He's saying that there is a group that called you the uncircumcision. Remember King David, he's not King David at the time, he's just little old David, and he fights Goliath, right? And when he goes out to fight Goliath, he starts cussing at Goliath. You uncircumcised, bleepity bleep, 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 Philistine, bleep, 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 bleep. Those are racial slurs he was throwing at him because they despised the uncircumcised. They considered the uncircumcised unclean, the Gentiles to be unclean, unworthy. This is not Torah, but that's what they thought. But, so the uncircumcision, the Gentiles, don't forget the word Gentile means goyim, dog. I mean, that's pretty descriptive by what is called the circumcision. So the Gentiles had a slang name for the Jews too. You're circumcised, which to them, to the Gentiles of the day, that'd be pretty weird. Why are you going to do that to yourself? What benefit is there to doing that to yourself? So one called themselves uncircumcised, the other called themselves circumcised. Guys, again, these are racial slurs. So think about the animosity through our culture, the history of who we've been, or not just us, the history of every nation on the planet. Prejudice is not secluded here in America, and America's come a long way. There's a lot of way to go. Got much things that we could do, but as far as the rest of the world is concerned, we have come so far so fast. But this is not a problem that is indicative just of America. This is a global problem. One group of people hated another group of people. One group of people enslaved another group of people. And every group of people have been enslaved by somebody at some time throughout all of history. That's what he's talking about here. So the goyim, by what is called the uncircumcision, the Jews, made in the flesh by hands, that at the time when you were goyim, when you were outside, you were without Messiah. You were excluded from being part of the cultivated olive tree, a citizenship of Israel. You were strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. Here's Acts chapter 10. So this is Shaul in another book really dealing with the same issue. You were two, and Yah's now made you one, which is what goes on in the rest of Ephesians. Acts chapter 10 and verse 28. Listen to the animosity between Jew and Gentile, because it's all over our book. It's just people they're not sensitive to it. Acts chapter 10 and verse 28, it says, and he said to them, you know that a Jew, a Yehudi man, is not allowed by law, by the traditions of the fathers, to associate with one or to associate with or go to one of another's race. This is Peter, Kepha, when he sees the whole vision of the sheep and the animals come down, take, kill, and eat. Remember, that's got nothing to do with food. That's a total misunderstanding. Nothing to do with food. This has to do with the Gentiles, the nations. And so when he goes to Cornelius' house, he lets Cornelius know, listen, I shouldn't even be here. Because according to the law, the traditions of the fathers, Pharisaic law, I can't even associate with you. I can't talk to you. I certainly can't come into your house. I certainly wouldn't eat with you. This was the prejudice of the day. This is the conflict of these two groups of people. But Kepha realizes, but Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. So what did the Jewish people call the goyim, the nations? They are unclean. All of them. Every man, woman, boy, girl, they're all goyim. Dogs are unclean. You don't eat dogs. Dog is an unclean thing to eat. They called them dogs. That should tell you, or at least give you a little bit of picture. Here's some more picture or more pieces to the puzzle that I want you to understand. Acts chapter 22 and verse 20. It says, and when the blood of your witness, this is Saul giving testimony in the temple with, tens of thousands of other Jews, of which the leaders of the Netzarim had already said, look how many believers, look how many people there are, Jews that believe in Yeshua, that are here in the temple. And there was lots of people who believed in Yeshua. All those people that were there on the day of Shavuot. This had grown over the years. Many people that were Jewish believed, that were part of Judaism, believed in Yeshua Messiah. They were part of the cultivated branch, but there was still this thing to overcome. So he's given his witness, telling about when, I was there when Stephen got killed. So he's given a little bit of a testimony. And he says, and when the blood of your witness, Stephen, was shed, I also was standing by giving approval to his death. You know the story. It says, and keeping the garments of those who were killing him. And he, meaning Yehovah, so he's going on the story of his testimony. And Yehovah said to me, go, because I shall send you from here, from Israel, from Jerusalem, which of course they believed in Yeshua there. That this was so, all right, hurrah, good, he's from Israel. Wait, God is sending you from here to where? To the nations, to the Goyim, to the dogs, to the unclean ones. Guys, if this was an issue Peter had to deal with and the rest of the apostles, don't you think every other Jew of that century had to also deal with this prejudice, this hard-heartedness, and not just them, the Gentiles as well? Verse 22, look at their response when he says, Yah sent me to the nations, to the Gentiles. And they were listening to him until this word. When they heard, oh, what? Yeah, what? You're going where? You're taking the message of our God to who? To them, to those people. And they listened to him until this word at the Gentiles. And then they lifted up their voice, saying, away with such a one, for it is not fitting that he should live. And then they began shouting and tearing their garments and throwing dust into the air. They all threw a hissy fit. And it wasn't just a hissy fit, guys. They rioted. They would have torn Saul apart had the Romans not gotten there and quite literally saved him from believers in Yeshua, whose animosity and anger and disgust with the nations, with the Gentiles, and the Gentiles' disgust with them it just blew up. They couldn't take it. So this, I'm just giving you a couple of windows that are found within our text that you can begin to put together this picture in your mind, if you would, of the animosity. And I guess the only way that maybe we could kind of relate to this is think back to, Civil War era. Think back to, prior the Civil Rights Movement. Think back to the animosity of the South. Think back to the whole idea of Jim Crow, which again was a Democrat. I'm not even going to get there because I start down that road, I'm gonna get in trouble and probably get taken off of YouTube. But all of that stuff, that prejudice that was there, think of that animosity. And here it is, we're watching the same thing going on in the scripture, not between black or white or any other color, between Jew and Gentile. And so this is really, really, really important stuff for us to understand, because this is what Shaul is writing to. This is why he's built the topic from chapter 9 to chapter 10 to chapter 11 and ultimately to chapter 12. So what did the Gentiles, now think about this. So this is the world that Shaul's writing in. So what did the Gentiles who are coming in, what do they not know? What did they have to change? What does Judah have to change? Well, we already saw Yeshua said, don't call anything clean, unclean. The answer is, what did the Gentiles have to learn? Everything. They had to learn everything. All that they knew, the culture, they had to learn ethics. They had to learn morality. They had to learn the national history. They had to learn about the promises. They had to learn about the instructions. They had to learn about righteousness. They had to learn about spiritual authority and leadership. They knew nothing of this coming into this. Meanwhile, the cultivated olive branch, they knew this stuff. They heard this stuff. This was not new to them. They had a problem with these other people who were coming in here. So you got two groups here, and this one, the Gentile group, is naive. They know nothing. Guys, it's not that much different in one sense from, where we have come from, except for us, it really came down to a thing of having to unlearn a whole lot first and then relearn a whole lot. But there were some nuggets of truth and bits of information and enough to get us that first talent to begin to build on it, even when we didn't know the whole truth, and we built on it. So there was some stuff there. So when we did come to the knowledge of the full truth, there were things that were familiar to us that we can identify with. These people coming in had no familiarity whatsoever. No concept of Passover, no concept of Shavuot, feast days, no concept of clean, no concept of... All of this was entirely bizarre and outside of their world that they had grown up in for generation to generation. And now they are being pulled into the family of God. The Gentiles had to learn. This is what Acts chapter 15 is really all about. But here's just verse 19. Listen to what it says. It says, therefore, I judge, this is Yeshua's brother standing up, making a decision about what to do with the Gentiles. I judge that we should not trouble those from among the nations, the Gentiles, who are now starting to come into faith, who are turning to Elohim. To not trouble them means to not trouble them with the traditions of the fathers, with Pharisaic Judaism, with rabbinical Judaism. Don't put that on them. We couldn't do it. They won't be able to do it either. Plus, they don't know anything. So, verse 20, but that we write to them, to who? To the Gentiles who are starting to come in, who are going to start to come to our synagogues, who are going to start to come to our fellowship dinners, who are going to start to hang out with us and marry our sons and our daughters, and they're going to be part of who we are. That we write to them that they need to abstain from the defilements of idols, that they need to stop whoring, that they need to stop from what is strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations, Moses has in every city those proclaiming him being read in the congregations every Sabbath. So what he's saying is, listen, here's where we start with these guys. Let's forget putting the depth or the concept of circumcision and all this stuff. Let's let them start here. Start here, and as verse 21 says, every Sabbath, wherever they are. Every Sabbath, because we know they're believers in Yeshua, so they're with believers in Yeshua. Every Sabbath, Moses will be taught. And they will then begin to learn ethics and morality and national history and promises and instructions and righteousness and et cetera, et cetera. Every Sabbath, every time they go to a service, every time they go to study, they will study. They'll hear it week after week after week after week, and they will grow. Who made this decision? Guys, get this. This is really important because this, again, is not a Gentile concept. Who made this decision? The elders, the leaders, the authorities. They made this decision. And who did this decision govern? It governed the Gentiles. It governed those who were no longer Gentiles. Now they had come into faith. This was governing them. So the Gentiles had to now submit. Think about this as a Gentile. You are now submitting not just to whoever the local teacher is, not just to whoever the local rabbi is, not just to whoever the president of the synagogue is, not just to whoever leads the Bible study there, not just to the apostles that come by, not just to a prophet that comes by, but now you're subject to guys, Jews, Think about this. I'm not saying this, I'm not trying to offend, but I'm telling you, we're subject to Jews in Jerusalem that we don't even know. And yes, they were. That would have been brand new for them. That would have been something very, very different for them. And yet this is exactly the situation that Saul is speaking to us about in Romans. But you need to know this background information in order to truly understand what is being said when he talks about authorities. He's not talking about governments. Here we go. Here is that now those three things, really four things that were said to the Gentiles to start off. This is your first step. This is 101. Again, it's written up there on the screen. Stop your defilement with idols, idolatry. I mean, I put it in yellow as my commentary, but I mean that's pretty straightforward. Defilement of idols is idolatry. And from whoring, which means any sexual sin. Any sexual sin, from, as he says, from whoring to homosexuality to lesbianism, because these were things that just went on in the culture. It was the law. You could do these things. Child, animal, you could do these things. This was no big deal. So that's what they're coming out of. They're saying, no, you gotta clean up your act at least this much in order for us to have fellowship. Stop your idolatry. Stop your sexual sin. Stop eating those things that are strangled. He's telling them about being unclean, eating what is unclean, knowing the difference between clean and unclean. They would have had no concept. Clean to them would have been, oh, I washed my hands. No, that's not clean. That's not what it means. So he's telling them, don't eat those things strangled and from blood, which is also a kosher concept. Drinking blood, the life was in the blood. You cannot drink the blood, which was a very common thing to do in the Gentile world, in the worship of the Gentile world. So these four things are the very four things that are mentioned to Ephraim in the book of Ezekiel. Chapter 37 and verse 22. It says, and I shall make them one nation, Ephraim, Israel, and Judah. The covenant is made with Ephraim and Judah. Ephraim, we already went over in another chapter 11, I believe, or 10, that Shaul is telling us Ephraim is the Gentiles. And if the Gentiles, as strangers and foreigners come in, they're connected to the house of Ephraim, as opposed to the house of Judah. But now we are all supposed to be one. He says, and I shall make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king over them all. And let them no longer be two nations, which is exactly what chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12 were telling us. They're two different groups of people, but now they'll have to learn how to be one. And let them no longer be divided into two kingdoms. And they shall no longer defile themselves with their idols, nor with their disgusting matters, uncleanness, things strangled, and blood. That's what he's referring to there. Nor with any of their transgressions, sexual sins. The very issues that were written to the Gentiles as to where you got to start cleaning up your act are the very issues Ezekiel already told us are the things that need to get cleaned up from the house of Ephraim, from the nations, the people who have come in. And I shall save them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned, and I shall, here it is, cleanse them. And they shall be my people, and I will be their Elohim. Okay, so with all of that, the idea again is this is a picture, a window for you, if you would, to understand what's going on culturally in that day. So this idea of authorities, now, it wouldn't have been new to them to have authority over them. They had Rome over them. They had governors. But to have Jews over us, to have Hebrews over us, and explaining things to us that are absolutely foreign to us. And we know that this winds up to be the dividing thing that divides the Netzarim from the Gentiles within 100 years of this. Not even that, within one generation, that this division, because the Gentiles did not do what Shaul is telling them to do in chapter 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, and all over the book. But these concepts of authorities, of listening to the elders in Jerusalem, it's not new to the Jews. They understood that stuff. But it was new, or a new concept, to the Gentiles, or the former Gentiles. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 11. And he himself gave some as emissaries, and some as prophets, and some as evangelists, and some as shepherds and teachers. Guys, these are not new stuff. This is not, these what we call the fivefold ministry it's not new. This has been around. This wouldn't have been unfamiliar to the Jews. They had this stuff for a long time. Prophets and evangelists and teachers and shepherds. They had people that were sent ones from Yah. They knew this. This was not awkward to them, but the Gentiles didn't. And now these people who are being sent are Jews. This is a whole different world that they're getting into. And why are they sent? For the perfecting of the set apart ones, the work of service to building up the body of Messiah, until we all, both Jew and Gentile, until we all together come into the unity of belief, begin to understand what the cultivated olive tree was all about, and the knowledge of the Son of Elohim, a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the completeness of Messiah. Guys, this is a really, really key verse, because we read this and we think of it in church 21st century terms. Guys, this was not unfamiliar to the Jewish culture. This was very, very unfamiliar. And then for the people that are doing this, to be Jews would have been very, very unfamiliar to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the people from the other nations who despised the Jews, now coming into faith. Imagine the flack that they would have gotten from their families and friends and neighbors and all the rest of that stuff, and also from the Jewish people. We just saw how everybody erupted in Jerusalem. This was on both sides. So this was a powder keg that Saul is speaking to. He had the most difficult job to get this thing off the ground and to try to get us to understand what this is about. So, customs and taxes. This is really important, because if we're talking about leaders, do we pay customs and taxes to them? Now, remember what the definitions of customs and taxes was. Again, we went over it. Just go back in the video. You can check it out again. But those definitions are very important, because here in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verses 3, and I forgot what verse it goes to, but it goes for a little bit. Listen to what Shaul is saying, writing to the church, the congregation at Corinth, who are predominantly, if not totally, former Gentiles. There were some in Corinth who got haughty, did exactly the thing that Shaul said not to do to the Romans. They thought, we got this. We don't need Saul. We don't need Shaul. We're not going to be under his authority. And so he has to give an account. Chapter 9 and verse 3 says, in my defense, to those who examine me in this, do we not have a right to eat and drink? Do we not have a right to take along a sister, meaning a wife, as do others, emissaries, and the brothers of the master, and Kepha? Or do only Barnabas and I have no right to refrain from working? So what he's saying is, he's given them a defense for his ministry, but he's saying, look, I have the right to get paid, to have the congregations that I shepherd to help me along in doing this message. Look, I can't carry a wife. Shouldn't I be able to bring my wife everywhere that I'm going to go and do ministry, just like Kepha does, just like Yeshua's brothers do? Why shouldn't Barnabas and I, are we the only ones? But listen to the whole topic before we get into it. But he's saying we have the right to glean from the people that we are sharing with. Verse 7, it says, who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of the fruit? Or who shepherds a flock and does not feed on the milk of the flock? So he's saying we are owed, and I don't say this in a self, because it kind of, you listen to this and I always kind of shy away from talking about a lot of this stuff because it seems, kind of self-satisfying. Well, not self-satisfying. It kind of, it's just something I want to be really, really careful of. But here it is. We can't avoid it. Here it is, chapter 13. We need to understand this properly. Self-satisfying, self-gratificating, whatever the word is. But verse 7, it says, what soldier, again, does a soldiering at his own expense? Or who plants a vineyard, doesn't eat of its fruit? Or who shepherds a flock and doesn't feed on the milk of the flock? Do I say this as a man? So he's saying these are human principles you should understand. Or does not the Torah say the same thing too? He's telling them, listen, what I'm telling you is a Torah principle. He's telling them you need to live by God's instruction. For it has been written in the Torah of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Is it about oxen Elohim is concerned? So he's given us a Torah verse, a scripture that was not really about, but when the oxen plowed, the oxen were allowed to eat whatever grain as they were, going through the field. Of course you would let them eat. Those are the two animals that are actually plowing the land. You let them eat. It keeps them going. It's the carrot in front of them. And that's what he's saying. So he's saying, doesn't the Torah already teach us this? That those who are in leadership are worthy of taxes, are worthy of customs, are worthy of a personal assessment of value, are worthy of the utmost in their doings. That's what he's referring to here. Here is verse, I think I went a little bit too far. Here's verse 10, same chapter in Corinthians. I think I had 1 Corinthians. I think it might be 2 Corinthians. Guys, somebody want to check me on that. I don't know if I put 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians down, but here it is. It says, or does he say it because of us all? So he's still going into the whole idea of the oxen treading the grain. Or does he say it because of us all? For this reason, because of us. He's saying this whole oxen and the grain thing, he wrote this for us, is what he's saying. For it is written because of us, that he who plows should plow in expectation. There should be an expectation of benefit to the one who is doing the work, and the thresher in expectation of sharing. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap material goods from you? Now, again, I don't want this to sound self-serving because that's not how I'm meaning it. And we've got a great congregation, and we're Yah's provided, and it's wonderful. But this is a principle we need to understand. If others share authority over you, what others? Now, Shaul is an evangelist coming from the outside, an emissary coming from the outside. Who else has authority over them? Their shepherd, their rabbi, the president of the synagogue, the teachers. They all had authority over them. They were teaching them how to be a cultivated vine. Again, Jews were doing this to people who were former Gentiles. Should not rather we? But we have not used this authority. So Paul, Shaul, and Barnabas, they didn't even ask for offerings when they got there. They worked, they did their thing. But there's a reason why they did it. It says, but we have not used this authority, but we put up with all. We put up with, lest we hinder the good news of Messiah. Why would he do that? Because he is coming to Gentiles who have no concept of this. So to ask them to give, ask them I almost shudder to use this word, to sow into what they were doing, would have, it's outside of what they would have understand. There were plenty of other charlatans, plenty of other religions that sham people that went around and got money, just like there is today. Just like there is today, there's all sorts of stuff out there that we call church that has nothing to do with Yehovah whatsoever, but they're all going to tell you, send me $1,000 and it turns into 10. Send me your offering. Send me your Social Security check. Send me your disability check. Don't worry. Don't pay your rent. Send it to me. You guys know all this stuff. This is so there's the junk that's out there. He's not talking about the junk. He's talking about a real shepherd, a real emissary, a real teacher, a real person sharing real seed with you. That person is worthy of their due if they are sharing real seed with you. Verse 13. Do you not know that those serving the set-apart place in the temple from the set-apart place, eat from the set-apart place? So he's talking about the priests. When all the offerings come in, they get a portion of it. They get the benefit of the work that they're doing, the food, the tithe, the tax. There's all of that came into the temple. Shaul is saying all of that now still applies to all of us. And have their share of the offerings of the slaughter place, taxes, tithes, offerings. So also, here it is, verse 14. I highlighted and read. So also, in the same way, the temple priests receive their gifts and offerings and their pay and their food and their housing and all the rest of that. So also, the master, Yeshua, instituted that those announcing the good news should live from the good news. Now, again, guys, the qualification here, and I get this, I absolutely understand this. The qualification here is that it has to be a shepherd, a real shepherd, sharing the real truth of Yah with you, which, listen, in this day and age is far and few between. But they're there. Yah has given shepherds that are after his own heart. They're all over the country, all over the world, and you got to find one. You've got to find a place that you fit in, that you can be part of this, because this is an important principle that you learn, that you receive, that you are taught. And if you learn and if you receive and you are taught, we are obliged as the people of God to make sure we sow into, we take care of, we support, we feed, we house, we clothe those. They have a right, those who spread the gospel, to live from the gospel. Again, this can be very, very self-serving and just kind of taken totally out of context with all the garbage that we see out there today. Forget about that. Unlearn that stuff. We're trying to learn the truth here of what this is actually about. So it says that Yeshua instituted this. Well, here it is, Matthew chapter 10 and verse 40. Listen to what Yeshua says. This is so important because there's nothing that Shaul would teach or any of the other apostles, emissaries. There's nothing that they would say that Yeshua hasn't already taught on. There isn't already in Moses. Here it is, Matthew chapter 10 and verse 40. It says, "He who receives you, who respects your authority as the minister, as the shepherd, as the pastor, as the teacher, whatever the office is. He who receives you receives me. And he who receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward." Romans chapter 13, verse 3. We just looked at it. This is what he's referring to. "Do good, and you shall have praise from it, for it is a servant of Elohim to you for good." That's exactly what Yeshua just said. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. What's a prophet's reward? Well, let's find out what it means to receive a prophet. "And he who receives a righteous one in the name of a righteous one shall receive a righteous one's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones, my leaders, my authorities that I am sending out, the authority that comes just from Yah, whoever receives one of these little ones a cup of cold water only in the name of a disciple, truly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. Understand what Yeshua is saying here. When you hear a real, a sincere, I'm not talking about all the fly-by-night stuff that's out there, a true and real prophet of God, a true and real teacher of the word of God, and you receive him as such, there not only is it incumbent upon we the individual to make sure we assess the value of that and give to the utmost. Custom, taxes to who taxes are due, custom to who custom is due. Do that. And not only do you get the seed and the word, but you will get a reward. If it's a prophet, then there's a prophet's reward coming to you. If he's a righteous man, then there is a righteous man's reward coming to you for the physical things that you give to keep that shepherd, that emissary, that person doing the things that they do. Here is, now remember this word, anybody that gives even a cold glass of water, you're going to receive, you're not going to lose your reward. Now, listen to this. This is Matthew chapter 25. This is the dividing of the sheep and goats. And listen to what it says. And all the nations, and this is including the modern day nation of Israel. This is everybody. All the nations are involved in this. All the people, everybody, shall be gathered before him, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates his sheep from the goats. Then the sovereign shall say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous shall answer him, saying, Master, when did we see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and gave you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and took you in, and naked and clothed you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and we came to you? And the sovereign shall answer and say to them, Truly I say to you, insofar as you did it to one of these, my emissaries, my authority, my shepherds, my teachers, my pastors, those people that have been sent out to feed you, to plow the ground, as you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me, which is exactly what we just read in Matthew, that give a cup of cold water and you receive it as a prophet, you'll receive a prophet's reward. What does he talk? What prophet's reward? Come, enter the kingdom. You have a prophet's reward waiting for you. So, this throws the whole concept, the whole idea that, well, all I got to just do is believe and that's it. I'm done. No, listen to what Yeshua is saying here. If you do not provide for, take care of the true prophets of God, the true ones who are coming. Think about what Israel did, why the wrath of God came down on Jerusalem, because they rejected the prophets of God. They killed the prophets of God. They stoned them. They did horrible things to them. Here he's saying, you didn't do that to these people. You did what was right. You provided for them. You gave for them. And now you're going to receive your reward. So this whole idea that all I got to do is believe and that's it, that's not what Yeshua is saying. And here's an aspect that we haven't even thought of. He is talking about whether you're listening to shepherd, a good shepherd, a real shepherd, or teacher or prophet or whatever he is speaking to you, and you decide, yeah, all right, I listen to it, but I know they need something. They're asking. I'm not there. They're all a bunch of crooks anyway. Yeah, I listen to it over and over and over again and get a lot out of the teachings. I'm really encouraged, but it's my money, and I'm online and they don't know me, and I'm not gonna even bother with it. Listen to what the rest of what Yeshua says in Matthew 25:41. He shall then say to those on the left hand, Go away from me, accursed ones, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his messengers. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. You did not give a personal concept. You didn't evaluate financially the benefit of what you were receiving in the word. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, you did not take me in. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they shall answer him, saying, Master, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick and in prison, and not serve you? Then he said, just like he said earlier in Matthew, when you, as far as you did not do it to one of the least of these, as you did not support these who I truly sent, as you did not do it to them, you did not do it to me. And these shall go into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into everlasting life. Wow, that's a whole different ballgame, guys, than what we've been taught, what we've understood. And again, remember the definitions here, because the definitions are really, really important. Let me give them to you one more time. To pay tax or tribute is an individual assessment upon a person. Your individual assessment as to their gratuity, I guess is a way of saying it, or your custom, a set or definite point of goal to the utmost, to give to the utmost. Guys, those aren't my words. I'm trying not to be self-serving here, but it's kind of hard. I feel bad about it, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to tell you what this is actually saying and what this is actually about in Matthew chapter 25, because we don't hear this. We're not told this, and yet this was the issue that Saul was talking about all the way back here in Romans. So Romans chapter 13, let's go through real quick. I know I'm almost out of time. Let's go through real quick and let's read it now with this understanding that we now have. Now that we have some of the background, let's go through and let's read it again. Let every being be in subjection to the governing authorities, to the spiritual authority. The little ones that Yeshua sends out, that you give water to, food to, and all, etc., etc., etc. Because if you do it to them, you're doing it to Yeshua. And if you do it to Yeshua, then you are doing it to Father. For there is no authority except from Elohim, and the authorities that exist are appointed by Elohim. So he who opposes the authority withstands the institution of Elohim. That's big. That's big. Guys, I got a wonderful, wonderful group of people, wonderful congregation, very, very supportive, very, very generous. We love them. But over the years, I have absolutely seen people, experienced people, didn't like it, didn't want to hear it, got offended, walked away, were part of congregations for years, didn't give an offering, a dime, didn't care about any of that. Guys, that's who he's talking about. That's what he's saying. If that's the place you're being fed, if you are truly, truly, truly being fed, there's a responsibility that we have. So he who opposes the authority withstands the institution of Elohim. Receive you, you receive me, and the Father. And those who withstand shall bring judgment on themselves. That's exactly what we just read in the sheep and the goats. That's what's coming. Do this, do it consistently, turn your heart off. That is what is coming. You can call on Yeshua all you want. If your heart, if at some point you don't grasp this, you can't recognize good, solid biblical teaching that is leading you down the right path, and then do what is measure out, what is the right term? I want to make sure I use the right term again. That you make an individual assessment on a person or a property. You need to do that. Verse 3 says, "For those ruling are an object of fear and not, are an object of fear not to good works, not to the commandments, but to evil." Those who are leaders should definitely be telling you, stay away from evil. Don't do what is wrong. Teach what sin is. Make it a hard line. This is what we do not do. This is what righteousness is. This is what we do. That's a shepherd. That's a teacher. That's an emissary. Where are we? Verse 4, for it is a servant of Elohim for you for good. For if you do evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword in vain. He's talking about elder discipline, which has totally gone out the window in our modern age. We have no idea what this actually even means. For it is a servant of Elohim, a revenger, to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And I don't have time to get into it, but read for yourselves 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, which is, remember, that's the church he was writing to, the congregation, and the problem that they had going on there, that nobody judged somebody who did some crazy, even stuff Gentiles wouldn't do, he says, that they were doing it, and the congregation there was no leader there to help them to, and eventually he says, get rid of the guy, send him out, Satan's going to deal with him, wrath is going to be put on him. He did it as an elder. He did it as a leader. Therefore, it is necessary to be subject not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience. As you love the Lord, as you learn him, as you're receiving good instruction, you do it out of conscience, not just out of fear. For because of this, you also pay taxes. Your cup of water, your food, or your clothing, all of that, that's the tax. For they are servants of Elohim, attending continually to these duties. To what duties? To teaching you Torah, to teaching the instruction. Render therefore to all what is due them. Tax to whom tax is due. Again, tax to whom tax is due means to make again, one more time, I lost it here, to make an individual assessment. Tax to who tax is due. Tax to whose tax is due. Toll to whom toll. Fear to whom fear. And that word toll is custom. Custom to who custom is due. Fear to who fear is due. Respect to those who earn respect, who are true shepherds. Respect. Respect to respect. Owe no one in any manner except to love one another. For he who loves another has filled the Torah. He's not saying love in spite of giving. He's saying love in your giving. As much as you did it unto them, you do it unto Yeshua. We're almost done here. Verse 8 says, owe no one any, we just read that, owe no one any matter except love to one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the Torah. For this you shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. Guys, these aren't things the government tells us not to do. These aren't things Rome would. In Rome, there's a lot of adultery going on. In Rome, there was a lot of murder going on. There was a lot of stealing going on. There's a lot of false witness going on, and it was built on covetousness. These are not things that come from the government. For this you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. And if there is any other command that is summed up in this word. So he's telling them, Torah, do Torah. That's exactly what this is. Verse 10, love does no evil, is summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about this on our morning manna this upcoming week. We're going to talk about the commandments. But here it is, verse 10, love does no evil to a neighbor, whether they are Jew or former Gentile. Therefore, love is the completion or the fulfilling of the Torah. Who's he telling to love each other? These two groups starting from chapter 9 that were opposed to each other, that hate each other, that have now become together into the cultivated vine. That's the topic that has been the topic throughout the book and is the topic of chapter 13. For now our deliverance is nearer than when we did first believe. Verse 12, the night is far advanced. Darkness is coming. Darkness of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Darkness is coming upon the whole house of Israel. The priesthood, all of it. Darkness is coming on them. And the day comes near, or come near, means the day is coming to an end. It's coming, darkness is coming and light is fading. So let us, now by the us, here it is, the us, this is like the culmination of everything. It's how you know this is what he's talking about. So let us who? The natural branches and the grafted in branches, who together make up the whole house of Israel. Let us put off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Verse 13, let us, the two groups, now one, walk becomingly as in the day, not in wild parties and drunkenness, not in living together in indecencies, not in fighting and in envy, Jew against Gentile, none of that, but put on the Master Yeshua Messiah and make no provision for the lust of the flesh. All right, that is the chapter, and I've run out of time for tonight. Got so much more I wanted to share with you, but here's the deal, guys. Chapter 13, even though you will see it in every commentary there is, you'll hear it from preacher to preacher to preacher, it is not about obeying the civil authorities. There are times when civil disobedience is the right thing to do. Just like Daniel, just like the 3 Hebrew boys. There is a place for that. There is also a time, and certainly I'm not saying you don't obey, you don't love the king, you don't pray for your president, you do all of those things, but that has nothing to do with this chapter. This chapter is about something very, very different and very, very important, because it will be the dividing of the sheep and the goats, at least one of the aspects of the great judgment. So important, very, very important. Guys, I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed the study. It was fun. Really, really important stuff. This is definitely the kind of message you want to get to somebody who you talk to them and they'll look at that chapter and say, oh, this is about, paying our taxes or doing what the government says to do or taking this or taking that. That just got nothing to do with it. Hopefully they'll have eyes to see and ears to hear and receive a righteous man's statements and get a righteous man's rewards if they listen to it. All right, guys. So anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. Don't forget, if you can help us out, please, 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 you can give me a call. You can give Sister Karen a call. You can give Pastor Matt a call. Let us know that you're coming so we got an idea. We need quite a few hands to move a whole bunch of different stuff. It breaks my heart to have to ask you, especially on a Sabbath. But like I said, our donkey is in the hole, and we really, really need some help. So if you can help out, that's wonderful. We will have morning manna, and then right after the morning manna, we'll go ahead. We'll be there already, even during morning manna. We'll be down there and getting set up. So if you can help out, great. We'll eat some food together and hang out and have a good Sabbath together, getting the donkey out of the hole. So with that, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And don't forget to join us this weekend as we continue with our tabernacles. We're going to start to get into tabernacles. This upcoming Friday, of course, is for us. Again, it's a little bit different from the Jewish calendar, but for us, it is Yom Kippur Eve. And then next Wednesday night begins Tabernacles, and join us for our 7:30 p.m. Phone call. We're going to have a phone call each night at the same time. Last as long as people want to talk. We'll talk about a different topic, but that'll be our way of getting together on Tabernacles. Build your sukkah if you can. I'm putting mine out in my backyard. Going to make it real nice and eat some dinner out there and have a good time. So hopefully you can do the same. Guys, we love you. Thank you so much for being part of LMC. God bless, guys. And as always, Shalom.